I never thought my life would spiral so fast. Not when I had married a man who seemed untouchable. Gregory Stanton, billionaire heir to Stanton Industries, had swept me off my feet with charm, wealth, and promises of a fairy tale life. But fairy tales, I would soon learn, have hidden traps. That morning, the clinic had confirmed what I already suspected. I was pregnant. My heart leapt, envisioning our child, a tiny new world I had carried within me. Later that evening, I found Gregory waiting in the penthouse living room, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. I told him softly, hoping for warmth, "Gregory, I'm pregnant." His eyes flickered, but not with joy. Instead, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Inconvenient," he said flatly. The word stabbed through me, sharper than any betrayal I could imagine. I stared at him, my stomach tightening not from fear, but from the dawning realization that wealth could buy everything except decency. That night, I lay awake, cradling the small secret inside me, wondering if the man I loved was capable of cruelty this deep. I didn't yet know the Heirship documents would transform that single word, inconvenient, into a reckoning Gregory would never forget. The days that followed were a whirlwind of cold glances and tense silences. Gregory had returned to his office, leaving me with the empty echo of our conversations. I tried to reach out, to speak, but each attempt was met with a polite dismissal. "Focus on yourself," he said once, almost rehearsed. But my intuition screamed that he had a plan I was only beginning to understand. That evening, while scrolling through old papers in the penthouse study, I stumbled upon a stack of folders labeled Stanton Heirship. My pulse quickened. Could this be what I had feared and hoped for? The documents outlined the succession plan, detailing every asset, every investment, and importantly, the clauses that dictated inheritance. My heart raced as I read line after line. The law protected the unborn heir, regardless of Gregory's whims. Suddenly, the word inconvenient didn't seem absolute. I realized the power of knowledge, the leverage I hadn't expected to wield. That night, I sat by the window, cradling my belly, imagining the moment when Gregory would learn that his arrogance might cost him far more than his temper could ever threaten. I knew I had to be careful. One misstep could cost me everything. But patience, I decided, would become my ally. 2 weeks passed before Gregory noticed the change. I had begun keeping meticulous records, photocopying key clauses, and mapping out his likely reactions. The servants noticed my quiet determination, but didn't question it, too intimidated by Gregory's presence to interfere. Then came the dinner invitation that would shift everything. Gregory was unusually charming, perhaps sensing something, or trying to sense it. He poured wine, smiled, and asked about my day. I met his eyes, masking the storm within me. "I've been reviewing some of your documents," I said casually, letting the words hang between us like a trap. He stiffened, fork midway to his mouth. "Oh," he said cautiously. I nodded, sipping my water, my stomach churning. "There are provisions I wasn't aware of, protections for the unborn child." I watched his face go blank for a moment, then a flicker of panic. That night, I realized how fragile his composure was. Beneath the silk suits and diamond watches, he was human and, like all humans, vulnerable to knowledge he could not control. I felt a thrill of cautious triumph, tempered with fear. One misstep, one hasty word, could unravel my plan. But for the first time, I sensed that the scales of power were beginning to tip. Over the next few days, I observed him more closely than ever. Gregory began checking documents obsessively, scanning clauses, consulting lawyers with urgent whispers. I pretended ignorance, sitting with my novels, playing the devoted wife. But inside, I was planning every step, meetings, announcements, even the precise moment I would confront him. One afternoon, a courier arrived with an envelope addressed to me in Gregory's handwriting. I opened it slowly, expecting either a trap or a warning. Inside, a note simply said, "We need to talk. Heirship matters." My hands trembled. This was my opening. I felt the first taste of control, a sensation I had not known in months of fear and silence. That evening, I drafted my own letter, an outline of what I intended to say, ensuring every word would carry weight, yet remain legally sound. I couldn't afford drama, only precision. My unborn child, the center of this storm, deserved that much. For the first time, I slept with a sense of purpose, though the tension remained, sharp and unyielding, like a blade suspended above our lives. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Gregory's private office smelled of polished wood and expensive leather, a place I had never felt welcome until now. He stood behind the mahogany desk, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You've been reading the Heirship documents," he stated, not as a question, but as accusation. I held his gaze, calm, but resolute. I needed to understand my rights and our child's. His lips pressed together, and for the first time, I saw fear flash across his face. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, but the usual certainty in his tone was absent. I handed him a copy of the clauses, highlighting the protections for our unborn heir. His eyes darted to each section, scanning, calculating. Silence fell heavy in the room, broken only by the ticking of the ornate clock on the wall. In that moment, I realized something vital. Power had shifted, imperceptibly but irrevocably. I could feel the subtle tremor of control, the realization that my pregnancy was no longer an inconvenience. It was leverage, the most expensive word he would ever regret uttering. The days that followed were tense, each one a careful dance. Gregory avoided discussing personal matters, but spent hours in his office, consulting lawyers and scribbling notes. I watched him from the shadows, my heart racing with each step he took. I could sense the anxiety behind his composed exterior. He didn't realize that I had anticipated every move, memorized clauses, and prepared for every counter. The servants noticed subtle changes in his behavior, whispering behind closed doors. But I remained silent, letting the storm brew quietly. At night, I sat in the nursery we hadn't yet furnished, cradling my growing belly, whispering promises to the child who had already become my anchor. The power of knowledge had given me courage I didn't know I possessed. Gregory might control millions, but he could not undo the legal protections surrounding our unborn child. I began imagining the day I would reveal the documents fully, timing it perfectly to ensure maximum impact. Each evening, I rehearsed, refining my words, gauging his probable reactions, and preparing contingencies. My fear had transformed into strategy. I knew patience would be the ultimate weapon. Somewhere deep inside, I felt a spark of triumph, quiet yet burning, knowing that soon the man who had called my pregnancy inconvenient would have no choice but to face the consequences of underestimating me. It happened on a Thursday. Gregory called me to the office unexpectedly. My heart pounded as I entered the room, holding the documents discreetly in my bag. He motioned for me to sit, his expression unreadable. "I want to hear your side," he said, his voice measured. I nodded, letting him underestimate me further. "I've reviewed the heirship clauses," I began slowly, "and I now understand our child's rights." His brows furrowed, a shadow of irritation crossing his face. I reached into my bag, producing a neat folder. "These highlight the protections for our unborn heir," I said, placing it on the desk. He leaned forward, scanning the pages, muttering legal jargon under his breath. I stayed calm, letting the silence stretch, letting him wrestle with his first taste of panic. You knew?" he asked finally, almost in disbelief. I nodded. "Yes. And now we need to discuss what that means for both of us." He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the clock as if searching for an escape. I realized then that his arrogance had blinded him to a simple truth. A mother's determination, backed by law, could move mountains. I felt a surge of hope. The balance of power had begun to shift, and I was finally standing on firm ground. Over the weekend, I strategized carefully, plotting every conversation with Gregory. I had observed him, his habits, his pride, his need to always feel in control. This knowledge became my advantage. I reviewed the documents again, ensuring I could cite every line if he tried to twist the truth. On Monday, I confronted him subtly during breakfast. He attempted his usual charm, smiling, offering croissants. I met his gaze steadily, sipping my coffee. "We need to talk about succession," I said, deliberately casual. His smile faltered. "Already?" he asked, trying to mask impatience. I nodded, letting the weight of the statement settle in the room. The heirship clauses were precise, clear, and impossible to ignore. He shifted uneasily, adjusting his cufflinks, a small sign of discomfort I had learned to recognize. "You realize what this could cost me," he murmured. I simply smiled. "I'm not here to cost you anything. I'm here to ensure what's rightfully ours." The quiet tension was almost unbearable. I felt the power of truth pressing down, a force stronger than money, stronger than influence. That night, I went to bed feeling a strange mix of anxiety and triumph, knowing that every move I made was bringing us closer to the moment when Gregory would have no choice but to accept reality. The inconvenient pregnancy was becoming the ultimate leverage. By midweek, Gregory's behavior changed noticeably. He no longer brushed off discussions and seemed to calculate every word before speaking. I noticed subtle tremors in his confidence during meetings and phone calls. He consulted lawyers frequently, often in hushed tones. I stayed observant, quietly noting every detail, preparing for the confrontation that would determine our future. One evening he called me into his study, a rare softness in his tone. "I've been thinking," he said, pacing slowly, "about the heirship documents and about you." I nodded calmly, letting him underestimate my awareness. "It's not just about legality," I said gently. "It's about what's fair for the child." He stopped pacing, considering my words. "I never imagined this would happen," he admitted quietly. I saw a rare vulnerability in his eyes. For the first time, I realized that my careful planning had shaken his core. He had always believed his wealth and influence could control everything. Now, the unborn child, an entity smaller than either of us, held the power to unbalance his world. I didn't rush him, letting the silence deepen. I had learned the art of patience, of letting fear settle gradually before revealing the full truth. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing but determined. The real confrontation was approaching, and I knew the timing had to be perfect. Friday arrived with an intensity one could hardly contain. Gregory summoned me to a formal meeting, this time in his law firm's conference room. I entered, documents in hand, and noticed the tension in the air. His usual confident posture was rigid, eyes darting to the papers I carried. "You've been preparing," he stated flatly. I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I've ensured our child's rights are protected," I said firmly, placing the folder on the table. The lawyers glanced between us, sensing an unspoken drama. Gregory's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the folder, flipping through the pages. I waited, letting each second stretch, knowing the impact of every pause. "This changes everything," he muttered, almost to himself. I smiled subtly, recognizing the moment of realization. "It does," I said, "but it's only fair. It's what the child deserves." He sank into the chair, running a hand over his face. I felt a wave of satisfaction, knowing that patience and preparation had brought us to this pivotal point. The word inconvenient would never again carry the power it once did. In that conference room, I glimpsed a new future, one where justice, careful planning, and courage would redefine our lives. And yet, I knew the climax was still ahead. The final act of this drama had not yet been played. Saturday morning, I awoke to a quiet house, the usual buzz of staff replaced by an almost eerie stillness. Gregory had left early, presumably to consult yet another lawyer. I spent hours reviewing the heirship documents, making detailed notes on every clause, every contingency. I wanted to be ready for anything, every possible objection or delay he might attempt. By mid-morning, I could feel the weight of inevitability settling around me. This pregnancy, once deemed inconvenient, had transformed into the most potent instrument of justice I could wield. That afternoon, I went for a walk in the private gardens, allowing myself a moment of calm reflection. The air was crisp, but my mind raced. I thought about the conversations ahead, the confrontation that would define the relationship with the father of my child. I had anticipated his arrogance, his attempts to manipulate, and his insistence on control. Yet, even with preparation, a part of me trembled. This was about more than money. It was about respect, recognition, and ensuring the child would inherit rights without compromise. As I returned inside, I rehearsed my opening words for the meeting that evening, knowing timing and tone were crucial. Patience had brought us here, but the decisive moment was about to arrive. My heart pounded, a mixture of fear and fierce anticipation. The inconvenient pregnancy was now a sword in my hand. That evening, Gregory summoned me once more. The conference room felt colder than usual, the lights harsh and unyielding. I carried the folder, my heart steady, despite the nerves twisting in my stomach. He motioned me to sit and immediately began speaking in a clipped, measured tone. "I've reviewed the documents carefully," he said, "and I realize the implications for our family." I kept my expression neutral, letting him underestimate the satisfaction building inside me. "It's about protecting our child's future," I replied softly. He paused, then leaned forward, his fingers steepled, a sign I had come to recognize as both contemplation and frustration. "You've made your position clear," he said slowly, "but do you understand what this could cost?" I met his gaze directly. "I do, and I'm willing to face it if it means the child's rights are secure." A tense silence filled the room. His jaw tightened, and I sensed a shift in his mindset, an acknowledgement that my planning had put him on unfamiliar ground. I realized then that control was no longer his domain. The balance had shifted. The stakes had never been higher, and yet I felt a quiet confidence. Each word, each pause had been deliberate. I would not relent, and he would soon understand that the inconvenient pregnancy was now the most powerful leverage in our lives. Sunday was quiet, almost deceptive. Gregory remained in his study, phone pressed to his ear, debating, negotiating, and consulting. I observed from a distance, noting every detail, body language, tone, timing. I had become attuned to subtle signs, recognizing when tension reached its peak. I spent hours reviewing the clauses once more, ensuring I could reference any section immediately if challenged. By afternoon, I received a brief summons from Gregory. "We need to finalize arrangements for the Heirship." My pulse quickened. I had anticipated this moment, but knowing it had arrived sent shivers down my spine. I entered the room with the folder, and he gestured for me to sit. "I see you've prepared extensively," he remarked, a flicker of admiration hidden beneath his carefully controlled demeanor. I simply nodded, letting him settle into the uncomfortable realization that I had anticipated his every move. We discussed the logistics, the legal processes, signatures, and witnesses required. I guided him through each step, subtly asserting the child's rights while maintaining civility. By the time the meeting ended, a strange tension lingered in the air. He understood now. The pregnancy was no longer inconvenient. It was transformative, reshaping his perception, forcing him to navigate rules and realities he had previously ignored. I left the room with a sense of triumph, tempered by the knowledge that the final confrontation, the public acknowledgement, was still ahead. Monday arrived with the promise of finality. I had scheduled a formal meeting with the family lawyer, ensuring that every legal step was properly documented. Gregory arrived, dressed impeccably, attempting the usual mask of control. I carried the folder, each page a testament to preparation, patience, and strategy. The lawyer opened the session, reviewing the documents methodically. I watched Gregory's expression shift, from confidence to uncertainty, and finally a grudging acceptance. I intervened only when necessary, clarifying clauses, highlighting rights, and ensuring that every statement reinforced the child's position. Each moment felt like a chess match, and I had prepared every move in advance. By mid-afternoon, the session concluded, and the lawyer summarized the outcomes. Gregory leaned back, visibly drained, murmuring about unforeseen consequences. I remained calm, letting him absorb the gravity of the situation. Outside, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the estate. I felt a sense of closure building within me, but I knew this was not the end, merely the preparation for the ultimate revelation. At dinner, the atmosphere was subdued. Gregory spoke sparingly, a sign that he was processing more than he let on. I sat quietly, watching, waiting. The inconvenient pregnancy had evolved into a decisive force, one that had reshaped our interactions and would soon demand acknowledgement. My patience and strategy had brought us to this precipice. Tuesday morning dawned with a strange clarity. I awoke knowing the moment of truth was imminent. The Heirship documents had done their work, yet the final revelation, the one that would cement the child's rightful place, was still ahead. I dressed carefully, rehearsing phrases silently, preparing to speak with precision and authority. Gregory was already in the study, reviewing notes, his movements calculated, deliberate. I entered with measured steps, the folder in hand. He looked up, eyes narrowing slightly, a mixture of wariness and curiosity. "Today," I said calmly, "we formalize the acknowledgement of our child's rights." His hands paused on the papers, and I saw hesitation flicker across his features. The weight of legal authority now rested firmly in my hands, and he was acutely aware of it. "Are you prepared to proceed?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. He swallowed, nodded, and motioned for me to continue. Each signature, each clause, each confirmation was executed deliberately, with a gravity that neither of us could ignore. By midday, the process was complete. Gregory sat back, visibly shaken, yet compliant. I realized then that the inconvenient pregnancy had transformed into the most powerful currency. Leverage, respect, and acknowledgement rolled into one. And for the first time, I felt a sense of vindication, tempered with anticipation for the moments ahead. Wednesday morning arrived with a quiet intensity. I awoke early, listening to the estate slowly come to life. The staff moved discreetly, aware of the tension that lingered in the air. Gregory was already in his study, his presence a constant reminder of the balance we now navigated. I spent the morning reviewing correspondence, ensuring that all legal confirmations were properly filed. Each document represented a victory for our child, and the sense of inevitability was empowering. By mid-morning, I knew it was time to confront the issue that had haunted me since the beginning: Gregory's lingering attitude toward the pregnancy. I requested a private discussion, carefully choosing words that would command attention without igniting defensiveness. As I spoke, outlining expectations for acknowledgement and support, I watched his reactions. His eyes shifted, his jaw tightened, and subtle gestures betrayed the internal conflict he could no longer mask. I remained calm, deliberate, letting him process the reality. This child was not an inconvenience, but a legal and moral responsibility. The conversation stretched over an hour, filled with pauses, clarifications, and quiet intensity. By the end, I sensed a reluctant acceptance, a recognition that control had shifted in ways he could neither reverse nor ignore. The pregnancy had become a force far greater than a personal challenge. It had become the fulcrum upon which respect, authority, and inheritance now balanced. Thursday was a day of meticulous planning. I reviewed every clause, anticipating potential loopholes Gregory might exploit. I wanted the final acknowledgement to be indisputable, leaving no room for manipulation. When he arrived for our scheduled discussion, his posture radiated a careful restraint. I presented the finalized documents, explaining each point clearly, ensuring that all legal language was precise and enforceable. He listened, occasionally interjecting with questions, but I guided the conversation with confidence, answering every challenge calmly. Each word mattered. Each gesture was intentional. The air between us was tense yet controlled, a silent acknowledgement of shifting dynamics. As the meeting concluded, Gregory leaned back, eyes thoughtful, a faint recognition in his gaze that I had prepared for every contingency. I felt a surge of quiet triumph. The inconvenient pregnancy had evolved into undeniable authority, an instrument of power I wielded with precision. By evening, I reflected on the journey. Every doubt, every insult, every dismissive comment had led to this moment. The child's future was secure, legally and morally, and I had maintained dignity and control throughout. The anticipation of Gregory's eventual public acknowledgement lingered in my mind, a pending victory I would savor when it finally came to pass. Friday brought unexpected tension. While reviewing communications, I noticed subtle discrepancies in Gregory's tone during a phone call. Something had shifted. He was no longer attempting to dominate the discussion, but instead cautiously negotiating, testing boundaries. I realized the acknowledgement was imminent, but the emotional impact was yet to manifest. I prepared a precise approach, rehearsing statements for clarity and authority. When he arrived, I maintained a composed demeanor, carefully measuring each word. "We need to finalize this publicly," I said, watching his reaction closely. His brows furrowed, but he nodded, aware that resistance was no longer viable. The session unfolded with deliberate attention to detail, confirming legal rights, timelines, and obligations. Each confirmation reinforced the child's position, and I felt the balance of power shift definitively. By late afternoon, Gregory sat back, visibly drained, acknowledging the inevitability with silent resignation. I allowed him a moment, observing the internal struggle beneath his controlled exterior. For the first time, I sensed the depth of his understanding, that the inconvenient pregnancy had become a catalyst for accountability and respect. As I left the study, I felt both relief and anticipation. The final stage was approaching, the public acknowledgement that would cement the child's status and validate the months of planning, patience, and careful execution. The journey was far from over, but the path ahead was now unmistakably clear. Saturday morning was calm, yet charged. I awoke with a clear sense of purpose, ready to navigate the final interactions that would define the narrative. Gregory remained in the study, reviewing notes and previous agreements, his focus unwavering. I spent the morning preparing for the inevitable family meeting, where acknowledgement and clarity would be formalized. By late morning, he requested a brief discussion before assembling everyone. I joined him, carrying the documents, aware that each gesture, each phrase carried weight. He spoke cautiously, acknowledging the child's rights while attempting to preserve dignity in front of staff. I guided the conversation carefully, ensuring clarity without confrontation. The tension was palpable. Every word, every pause mattered. By midday, the discussion concluded, leaving the staff with a clear understanding of the child's position and Gregory's reluctant acceptance. I felt a quiet triumph, tempered by anticipation of the public acknowledgement that remained. Walking through the estate gardens afterward, I reflected on the transformation. What had begun as an inconvenient pregnancy had evolved into undeniable authority and leverage. The careful balance of preparation, strategy, and patience had brought us here, and the next steps would solidify the outcome. I knew the final confrontation would demand both courage and poise, but I felt ready. Every obstacle, every dismissive comment, every attempt at control had been anticipated and countered. The journey had taught me that patience and strategy were often more powerful than confrontation. Sunday dawned with an almost surreal clarity. The day of final acknowledgement had arrived, and I moved with deliberate calm. The staff sensed the tension, their movements quiet, respectful. Gregory prepared as if for battle, yet his demeanor reflected restraint, an unspoken acknowledgement of reality. I carried the documents, reviewing key points one last time, ensuring precision in every statement. The meeting began promptly, the room filled with a mixture of anticipation and controlled tension. I spoke clearly, outlining the child's rights, legal obligations, and expectations for acknowledgement, pausing deliberately to emphasize critical points. Gregory responded cautiously, his usual arrogance replaced by careful compliance. Each signature, each verbal affirmation, reinforced the child's position and highlighted the careful planning that had led to this moment. The process unfolded smoothly, though the weight of history and emotion made every detail significant. By afternoon, the acknowledgement was complete. The child's status was legally and socially recognized. I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that the journey had required patience, strategy, and resilience. The inconvenient pregnancy had become a force that reshaped relationships, commanded respect, and secured a future previously threatened by indifference. As the meeting ended, I realized the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. What had once been a personal challenge had transformed into a decisive victory, a testament to foresight, perseverance, and unwavering resolve. Monday morning felt almost unreal. The acknowledgement had been finalized, yet the weight of the past months lingered. I moved through the estate with quiet authority, observing the subtle shifts in staff behavior. Gregory's presence was now tempered. The arrogance that had once dominated interactions was replaced by cautious respect. I reviewed every document again, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. The legal confirmations, notarized signatures, and recorded statements were all intact, leaving no room for dispute. The child's position was secure, and I could finally focus on healing the emotional scars left by months of tension. During breakfast, Gregory approached, offering a measured smile, an unspoken acknowledgement that boundaries had shifted irreversibly. I responded calmly, allowing the interaction to remain professional, careful not to reopen old conflicts. By mid-morning, I convened a brief family meeting, clarifying expectations and reinforcing the child's rights. The atmosphere was tense but orderly, a testament to the meticulous planning that had guided every step. As the day unfolded, I reflected on the transformation. What had begun as a challenge labeled inconvenient had become a force that redefined authority, respect, and legacy. Every decision, every moment of patience had culminated in this quiet victory. The estate, once a stage for tension and dismissal, now reflected order, clarity, and the recognition of consequences. The journey was complete, yet the lessons remained vivid, shaping how I would navigate challenges in the future. Tuesday brought reflection and preparation for the broader announcement. I wanted the acknowledgement to be public, yet dignified, a moment that asserted authority without humiliation. Gregory hesitated initially, but I guided him through the process, emphasizing clarity, precision, and restraint. By mid-morning, press releases and formal statements were drafted, each word vetted for impact and legality. I reviewed them repeatedly, ensuring accuracy, coherence, and enforceable language. The final versions captured the reality of the child's status, reflecting both legal authority and moral responsibility. During this process, Gregory's demeanor shifted subtly. He recognized the necessity of cooperation, understanding that resistance would no longer serve his interests. The staff observed the preparations silently, aware of the historic nature of the forthcoming acknowledgement. I rehearsed every detail, anticipating questions, misinterpretations, and potential challenges. The tension in the air was palpable, yet my focus remained unshakable. By late afternoon, everything was ready: the formal acknowledgement, legal confirmations, and supporting documentation. I paused briefly, reflecting on the journey from dismissal to recognition, from inconvenience to undeniable authority. The child's future, once threatened by indifference, was now secure. As the day closed, I sensed that the final act was approaching, the public acknowledgement that would cement months of careful strategy, patience, and unwavering resolve. The stage was set for closure, and I was ready to claim it. Wednesday arrived with anticipation. The family meeting was scheduled for noon, with legal advisors present to ensure every detail was formalized. I moved with deliberate calm, the months of preparation guiding each step. Gregory entered with measured restraint, aware of the significance of the moment. I presented the documents once more, outlining each point clearly, leaving no room for ambiguity. The conversation unfolded slowly, each signature, each affirmation, reinforcing the child's position and the authority I had established. Gregory's attempts at resistance were minimal. The legal clarity and strategic planning left him no leverage. By early afternoon, the acknowledgement was complete and recorded formally. The child's inheritance, rights, and recognition were secure. I felt a wave of quiet triumph, tempered by exhaustion from months of careful maneuvering. The estate, once a place of tension and control struggles, now reflected clarity, respect, and legal certainty. Staff members moved with renewed confidence, aware that authority and responsibility had been firmly established. As I walked through the estate gardens, reflecting on the transformation, I realized how far we had come. What had started as a personal challenge, dismissed as inconvenient, had evolved into undeniable power and respect. Every detail, every strategic move, had contributed to this outcome. I felt an unshakable sense of accomplishment, knowing the child's future was no longer vulnerable, and my own authority, carefully earned, was solidified. Thursday was quieter than expected. The intensity of the previous days had given way to a measured calm. I spent the morning reviewing final confirmations, ensuring all legal and formal obligations were recorded accurately. Gregory remained unusually subdued, aware that the balance of power had shifted definitively. Staff interactions reflected this new equilibrium, respectful, controlled, and clear. I took time to reflect on the months of struggle, tension, and strategic planning that had brought us here. Each dismissive remark, every attempt to undermine my authority, had been anticipated, countered, and ultimately nullified. The pregnancy, once labeled inconvenient, had become a catalyst for empowerment, legal recognition, and respect. By mid-afternoon, I convened a private session with advisors to confirm that all records were complete, no detail overlooked, and the child's inheritance fully secured. Gregory observed quietly, understanding that opposition was no longer feasible. For the first time, I sensed genuine acknowledgement, not just compliance, but recognition of the calculated strategy that had guided every step. By evening, the estate reflected peace, order, and clarity. The tension that had dominated months of daily life had dissipated, replaced by an understanding of boundaries, responsibilities, and consequences. I felt a profound sense of closure, knowing the journey had been navigated with intelligence, patience, and unwavering resolve. The final stage, public acknowledgement, would cement this legacy permanently. Friday arrived as a day of closure. The public announcement was scheduled, final documents distributed, and every detail confirmed. I moved with deliberate composure, reflecting on the months of tension, strategy, and quiet triumph. Gregory, present but subdued, followed the protocol carefully, understanding that resistance was no longer possible. The acknowledgement unfolded smoothly, each statement, signature, and declaration reinforcing the child's position and securing inheritance rights. Staff and advisors observed quietly, aware that a historic shift had taken place. What had begun as an inconvenient pregnancy had become a defining moment of authority, respect, and legal power. I felt a wave of relief and quiet satisfaction. Every obstacle, every dismissive remark, and every attempt to undermine authority had been countered successfully. By afternoon, the formalities were complete, and the estate reflected calm, order, and clarity. I knew the child's future was secure, legally and morally, and the dynamics within the family had irrevocably shifted. Walking through the gardens, I reflected on the lessons learned. Patience, strategy, and precision had turned a challenge into a triumph. The journey had been arduous, yet the result was undeniable. What had once been inconvenient had become a catalyst for empowerment, transforming relationships, reinforcing authority, and ensuring a legacy that no one could challenge. I felt an unshakable sense of victory and closure as the sun set, marking the end of a remarkable chapter in our lives.